Hey, Anaja, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Steph. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome. I'm really excited for us to chat today and just share your perspective on training, share your perspective on strength, and all of the different things that you talk about. Which I'm really excited because we've touched on this in past podcasts, but we haven't ever really had somebody come on the show to specifically talk about some of the things that are really in your zone of genius. So I'm really excited to introduce you to everyone and hear from you all of the things that are going on in your world and you love teaching about.
Awesome. I'm really excited to be here, and I love sharing and talking about some of the things we're going to talk about today. And the more that we can share it, I think it benefits people outside of, just general exercise training. And I think it's an important influence into training. So.
Absolutely. All right. So give us some background, I guess, on yourself. Sometimes I call this a superhero origin story. I know that you really love strength. I know that you are an athlete yourself. Give us the kind of background. How did you get into sports and training? What influenced your decision to specialize in exercise science? Like, how did you get to this point?
Yeah, so I played softball growing up in high school and in college, and unfortunately I tore my ACL. So I tore my ACL in college for the second time, and at that point I kind of had to make a decision about whether I wanted to just walk and not pursue an athletic career. After tearing your ACL twice, the rehab gets twice as long. And it was through physical therapy, though, that I found exercise science. I really started wanting to understand how my body was healing, how I could get back to where I was, pre-injury. And I had a really awesome physical therapist that introduced me to group fitness. And that was kind of my entry level into fitness and sport and as a professional. And so I changed my major to exercise science just out of that relationship with my physical therapist. I was a pre-med major. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. And that changed suddenly, drastically after organic chem. And that's the weeding out class. So exercise science became my thing. I didn't really know what that all entailed. I just knew that I was fascinated with, how we can adapt to strength, how we can adapt to aerobic conditioning, the role that fitness and exercise played in people's lives that were around me. I just thought that was really important. And so I ended up getting my bachelor's in exercise science, went on and got my master's in sport administration. And I worked in our collegiate recreation program at the time, really teaching group fitness and doing personal training. And that was kind of my gateway into a professional in exercise and fitness and health. Fast forward a little bit, I developed this love for exercise, and we learned all the benefits for exercise and how it's so good for you and it helps with your physical and mental health. But then there's also this side that you experience of people just not wanting to be physically active and not wanting to exercise, or not knowing how, or not understanding the access points. And so I was reading through and reading through some articles, and there was this research article that said, almost 90% of people identified the benefits of exercise and physical activity, but of those 90%, only 33% were physically active on a regular basis. And so there was this weird juxtaposition between what we know and what we actually do. And so that kind of catapulted me into a PhD program to really understand kind of the psychological aspects behind exercise and behavior change, and how, since we know and we understand the positive benefits, how can we get more people involved and keep them involved? And so that's kind of what led me to here. I earned my PhD last year, and my focus is in the psychosocial aspects of physical activity and exercise. And that includes some of the adherence, motivation, and behavior change and things like that.
Wow. Well, congratulations
Thanks.
on earning your PhD. That's no small accomplishment. So well done for that. And I think what you're talking about here is so crucial. To your point, a lot of people are able to say, yeah, exercise is something that you do for XYZ benefits, and it is one of those sort of health promoting behaviors. But what are the things that stand in the way? and helping people to sort of move past those or work through them and overcome those things, what is in their power to change, I think is one of the key, like it's like the key to unlock all of the things that we know is so amazing about movement. I know that for you, discussing this, the elements of like mental health that go along with movement are very important. So it's not just the physical. Can you talk to us a little bit about the connection between movement and physical activity and mental health, and some of the things that we see are those positive changes, and what we're not necessarily talking about quite as much?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have spent a lot of time. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of research that was done for about 10 years asking participants to identify the benefits of physical activity. And of that list, I think 7 out of 10 identified physical changes: weight loss, muscle mass growth, the ability, functional activities, things like that, run faster, lift heavier. They identified all of these very physical changes. And very few identified psychological changes such as improved mood, improved cognitive behavior, so thinking and functioning and remembering. Long-term memory has shown to be connected to physical activity behavior. And so when we're talking about older individuals, we are trying to boost cognitive performance. You also see this with college students. So trying to connect study behaviors with movement, increased movement, less sedentary behavior to improve cognitive function. And then also enjoyment, happiness. Those are all things that we have seen a connection with increased physical activity. And I want to just preface that I say physical activity and exercise because in my field, they're different. Physical activity is general movement that, gets the heart rate going. And that could be anything from leisurely gardening to, taking a walk with your pet and things like that. But exercise is more planned, structured exercise for the purposes of some sort of health benefit. And so you'll hear me refer to physical activity and or exercise throughout this, because what we have learned is that a lot of the research, especially in the public health, from a public health lens, looks at physical activity in general and not necessarily structured exercise. And so that's kind of where we're headed when we talk about the connection between positive mental health. So improvements in stress levels, reduction of depression symptoms from a subclinical or a clinical diagnosis, and anxiety. What we've seen in a clinical standpoint is that we know that aerobic performance improves mental health, mental illness. But what we're looking at now is the relationship between strength training and mental illness. Is there a relationship there? Is there a dose response relationship? Meaning the more that you strength train, what is that frequency? What does that modality look like as it relates to anxiety, depression, stress, PTSD even, and some bipolar disorders? So that's all new and emerging research, but it's really important to understand that physical activity and exercise is not just about physical improvements. There are mental and psychological improvements as well that can be had.
That's so powerful. I know one of the things that some folks in my community will say are things like, one of the ways I deal with my stress is exercise, but they kind of wonder at some point whether or not it becomes like their only coping strategy. And so do you have any thoughts on that or anything that you've seen from your research?
Not necessarily from my research. I have also heard, physical activity and movement in general being a coping strategy, and it's a positive coping strategy. That is in the research, the connection between positive coping strategies versus avoidance behaviors. So we want to provide clients and athletes with positive activities that they can participate in that are going to reduce stress. But there is this other spectrum, because exercise is stress. Exercise is a stressor on the body as well. And so I think that we have to really balance the stress that exercise is going to put on us with what we're trying to cope and what we're trying to overcome and manage. I think it's really important that we can use exercise as a coping strategy, but it's not necessarily a stress reducer. And I think when we understand the differences between that, we still need to address those stressors in our lives and be able to adjust those stressors and manage those stressors. But exercise can be a positive coping strategy when we are in those moments of high stress.
Ooh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Thank you for making that distinction. And I think that's going to really help people to understand kind of their own interaction with exercise and activity, like you said. I think one of the things that I hear a lot from athletes, and when I say athletes, I mean athletic people who are training with a purpose. But when I talk to athletes and they are sort of like, wow, I didn't realize that even though I love my training or I love exercise, I love working out, it's really presenting some mental challenges for me. That's a huge part of it for a lot of people. And I hear a lot of like, oh, I don't feel like I'm motivated to work out and what's going on there. So I know that you're really deep in this world of talking about mental skills and self-efficacy and motivation. And I would just love to hear you kind of freestyle on this a little bit, because I think this is such an important aspect of, I guess, the longevity in participation in workouts and fitness. So what do you got for us there?
Absolutely. So I've seen this a lot, and I'll kind of, if you don't mind, transition at the end of this into kind of this framework that I've been working on optimizing performance. But overtraining and burnout is real, and it is a significant reducer in motivation and discipline for any activity. But in this context, in this space, we're talking about exercise and sport performance. Overtraining comes from the repetitive use of muscle groups in an activity without the proper recovery. Recovery is one of the things that helps us minimize and overcome overtraining and burnout. Overtraining specifically because that's the physical ramification, but people tend to not understand what recovery is. Recovery isn't sitting on the couch. Recovery isn't just taking one day off, but you are running tens of millions of errands and not fueling your body, hydrating properly, taking care of your sleep. I listened to an episode that you did on sleep, and I was like blasting it for everyone to hear, because that sleep is so important for the recovery of the physical recovery of your body to help us prevent overtraining. Overtraining leads to burnout. Burnout leads to poor motivation. Burnout, we've seen increased injury, which is the one of the most alarming symptoms that people don't draw a connection from. So when you have burnout, you have poor cognitive function, lack of recovery, and usually you have poor neuromuscular control. We see a ton of acute injuries as a direct result of burnout that results from overtraining. And so it's really important, one, that we recover, and two, that we cross-train. I'm an athlete. I do Olympic weightlifting. I snatch, I clean and jerk. And when you look at my training, in order to be really good at snatch and clean and jerk, what do? You snatch and you clean and jerk. And it gets pretty mundane. You do the same thing over and over again. That's how you build technical skills. But within that, I also run. I also do yoga. I'm a subpar CrossFitter, if you will. One of my training partners will ride a WOD, and I will begrudgingly do it, but it's because you need that cross training in order to help your body avoid the repetitive use of the same muscle groups over and over again, which is where we start to see those nagging injuries. One of the other things that we see in overtraining is the lack of checking in on that elbow injury that you just keep on ignoring from overuse. It will continue to grow. And then that injury turns into something that will not go away. And then that leads into not being able to train at all. And what we have seen, there was a research study published about 4 years ago, is the relationship between athletic injuries and depression. So athletes that are not able to train as frequently or as intensely as they have been show higher levels of depression, subclinical depression, but depression nonetheless, because that athletic identity is so strong that when you're not able to do those things any longer, it weighs on you from a psychological standpoint. And so as a coach, I am really, really a huge proponent on minimizing overtraining. The second that I see that you're not, moving the way that I know that you can move, or recovering the way I know that you can recover, I'll pull training back. I will, deload you. We will taper. We will take extra days off, because it's not worth it in the long run for your physical health, but also your mental health. It's not good in the long run for the longevity of being an athlete to overtrain. Sometimes I get younger athletes who they want to train 8 days a week if they can, and they figure the more hours that I spend in the gym, the better athlete I'm going to be. And that's not the recipe for longevity in sport, in a strength sport, in a high impact sport, or in your recreational runners and recreational lifters. Longevity is about protecting your body, recovering properly, fueling for what you're doing, and avoiding overtraining or reducing that overtraining.
Yes. Thank you. All right, everybody go I say rewind. I don't think that's an actual thing, but like tap back and like listen to this section again. This is real. You just dropped some incredible gems here and some really important stuff. And I'm so appreciative that you mentioned the connection between that subclinical depression. You mentioned identity, which was a word I had written down. When I got injured, this is many years ago at this point, but that was one of the first times I couldn't train. And it was mentally really, really hard. And I know that this is stuff people deal with all the time, because they're in my DMs like, I got hurt, I can't train. How do I make it through this? How do I cope with the fact that such a big part of my life, I can't participate in the way that I used to? So do you have any advice or any sort of, evidence-based practices or anything that you've seen has really helped people to kind of get through it, other than just saying like, it's just time?
Yeah.
Which I know time is a huge element, but what do you think?
Yeah. So, and I'll kind of parallel this with a story, my own story. I started Olympic weightlifting seriously as a competitive athlete about 7 years ago now, maybe 8. And I had dreams of making it big. I trained 5 days a week. I did all the things that I was supposed to do. I fueled myself. I ate well. I even went into double sessions. I was training double sessions a couple of days a week, and I was seeing a lot of improvement. At that moment in my life, I had the flexibility to really train full-time as an athlete. My partner supported me full-time as an athlete, and that's really, really important. We'll talk about social support towards the end of this, but that social support allowed me to really function and do what I needed to do to reach my goals. Then enter pandemic. Pandemic shut down a lot of things. We were stuck at home, gyms were closed, and we all shifted and we all pivoted. During that time also, I was writing my dissertation. If you're familiar with writing a PhD dissertation, it is a lonely, isolating, exhausting time of your life. And so my time, my lifestyle, the demands on my time shifted. And I went from being what I quote, and you can't see these quotes, but being an athlete, being a full-time athlete who was going to go far, to being stuck in the trenches of this dissertation research and not really understanding how to balance full-time athlete with full-time student. And I struggled with that. And so one of the things that I had to really understand is, what am I doing right now? What my lifestyle has shifted, and what does that mean for me as an athlete? I went from training 8 times a week to training 3 days per week. And a couple of the things that I had to really realize is that more wasn't necessarily better. Less isn't necessarily better. It's just different, and different is bad. We need different. We need to change up our frequency. We have the FIT principles: frequency, intensity, time, and type or modality. Those things need to change in order for us to see progress. And so here's a little story. I had not hit a personal best in 2 years. I was training 8 times a week and not seeing progress. Do you know how frustrating that is as an athlete? And I'm pretty sure your listeners can relate to that. You're working hard, you're putting in the time, you're doing what you need to do, and you're like, can I just get 1 additional pound? Like, can I just, and so, but all of this time, I was also up at 5 a.m. writing, sitting in front of my computer. I was more sedentary than I had been in years. My nutrition wasn't where it needed to be. I was drinking very obnoxious amounts of caffeine to just stay awake during the day. So all of these things around me, my lifestyle was changing. My nutrition was changing, but I was trying to hold on to the training. And that's what a lot of athletes, clients, athletic people don't really understand. Your lifestyle is going to constantly change. Your mindset is going to constantly change. My priorities went from being full-time athlete to being full-time, got to finish this PhD, but I was still holding on to full-time training, right? And so I was spinning my wheels, I was struggling. So I moved from 8 sessions a week to 3 days a week. 8 sessions to 3 75-minute sessions a week. I thought that I had lost it as an athlete, was never going anywhere. I PR'd my back squat by 10 kilos. Because I finally aligned my training goals with my nutrition, with my mindset, with my lifestyle. And it took me a moment to come to terms with that, to accept it. But when you then see those outcomes, those positive outcomes, you understand that it's more than just training more. Sometimes training less and making those things align with whatever else you have going on will actually improve the outcomes that you're looking for. And so I encourage listeners, I encourage people to take a step back. The socio-ecological approach to physical activity says that your natural environment is the biggest thing the biggest factor that impacts whether or not you're physically active, whether or not you make a change in a behavior. So your natural environment, the areas that you're living in, your social environment, those are all big factors that impact our abilities to be athletes, our physical activity levels. And I think that we forget that when those things are shifting and we're holding on to the same training styles that we've had for 5 or 10 years, all of a sudden, those training styles are outside of our sphere. And when it's outside, you're not going to find optimal performance there. And so that would be kind of what I would share with listeners is things change, you change, the seasons of life change. Now I'm coming out of my PhD program, I'm back to training 5 days a week, right? And I'm kind of actually like, hey, I think those 3 days a week, I like that 3-day-a-week program a lot, so we can ebb and flow. And change is not bad. It's just different. And sometimes it helps us improve and get closer to the goals that we're actually trying to get to.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal story. I think that's always very powerful because it's one thing to come on. I go on, podcasts, I've guests on this show, and, we tell those stories. They're real stories from maybe clients we've had or things we've seen. But then when we tell the story personally, people are like, oh, okay. Like it actually happened to you. You've been through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what you bring up about optimizing your strength and kind of aligning your training to where you are in life is so powerful. I heard recently from somebody who said, I used to be a competitor in CrossFit and, things have just changed in my life. I've kind of like, and I'm using air quotes here, retired from the competition circuit, if you will. And that person was saying, she's having a hard time with that element of like those, the competition is missing, or, she's used to look forward to what the season was going to bring, and now it doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Um, how have you made it through those times? I guess this kind of maybe tacks onto the conversation, but like, are there certain things you tell yourself? Or if you have had those moments where you're kind of feeling like you're missing out, or, it's not going to get better. Are there any things you repeat to yourself? Any other ways that you kind of get through that?
Yeah. One thing that I would suggest is reevaluating how your frame of reference for goals and performance. And from a sports psychology standpoint, there's a mastery approach and there's a performance approach. And that performance approach is generally what we do as athletes, right? We want to go into competition, we want to beat everyone, we want to be number one, we want to be on the podium. And so it's a constant comparison against a normative standard. Am I in the top 5? Am I in the top 10? Am I in first place, third place? How many points am I earning for my team? And so we go into competition and we go into performances with these performance approaches to goal setting, or performance approaches to, I guess, evaluating our approach. A mastery approach says, I'm going to compete against myself. And so it's a different frame of reference. And so maybe the last time you went into competition, your best squat was 100 kilos, 220 pounds. And so now your goal is to beat yourself, to improve upon yourself. Maybe it's not even necessarily a number, but it's consistency of movement. I have athletes where, in some sessions, we focus on consistency of movement at 85%. I don't care what your 1 rep max is. I want to see, can you hit 85% 6 times and look sexy doing it? Like, to me, that's a mastery approach to your goals, and it helps build self-efficacy. We talked at the beginning of this conversation about self-efficacy and self-confidence. And I think mastery approaches to performance, judging your own performance and your own competence based on yourself, based on, some improvement over your own longevity, helps us build self-efficacy. Self-confidence is a little bit different than self-efficacy. So I'll share that self-confidence is this global idea that I can do things, I'm good at things. Self-confidence is usually a personality trait. So some people are just naturally more confident than others. They will approach different situations, more aggressively or more assertively than others. And so self-confidence is this kind of global, more stable trait. Self-efficacy is more situation-based. So self-efficacy is about your ability or your belief that you can perform a specific task in any given situation. And so when we talk about physical activity or exercise or sport performance, we're looking at self-efficacy, your ability to come into a situation and perform regardless of what's happening. And I think self-efficacy is a very important determinant of sport. It's a very important determinant of physical activity, whether someone will adhere to physical activity or exercise. Self-efficacy predicts performance. And then on the flip side, performance actually predicts self-efficacy. So if that makes sense. So the more self-efficacy I have, the higher my self-efficacy is, the more likely I'm able to go out there, perform my best, take on more difficult, challenging tasks, and be successful. Now, the outcome of that performance, me being successful, actually contributes to higher levels of self-efficacy. So it's a circular kind of give and take, unilateral directional type of relationship. And so when we talk about, improving mastery approaches, if I'm competing against me and not some other normative standard, I'm not competing against Steph anymore, because, that's not the season of life that I'm in. I'm able to build and improve that self-efficacy, because I know that if I'm going out and giving my 100% best effort and I am improving on my own performance, I'm more confident that I can do it again. Self-efficacy is not about it being easy. It's not about choosing easy tasks. It's simply about believing that you have the tools to overcome whatever obstacle is going to come. And so I think that's so important when we talk about exercise, when we talk about athletics, because it's not meant to be easy, right? Once you get good at one thing, there's always going to be something else that you have to get good at. I always say a PR is a PR until it's not a PR. Once you hit it, you're always looking for that next milestone. I remember the first time I squatted 100 kilos, then it was like, well, now I want 110. And so like, you're never going to reach that pinnacle where you're like, I'm good at squatting 150 kilos now. I don't want any more. I don't want to squat heavier. But you can build other goals. Maybe you want to be able to squat more effectively. Maybe you want to squat more frequently. Maybe you want to feel better, more confident when you get to that, heavier load. And all of those things contribute to our self-efficacy. Performance accomplishment. So looking at the success, the outcomes of your past performances. Vicarious experiences. So social support is so critical to self-efficacy, because I can watch significant others, I can watch teammates, I can watch other people in my circle, and their experiences help build my own self-efficacy. It's really cool to watch a team build each other up, and you have this kind of collective group self-efficacy. And I think that that's important when we talk about different seasons of our lives and how things shift and change. Now it's about the group. Now it's about the group performing well. I see it in CrossFit a lot. You go from individual competition and you're like, well, I didn't make the individual stage anymore, but now I'm in this group stage. And to watch the power of group dynamics play and improve motivation and improve self-efficacy is really important. Coaching also helps contribute to self-efficacy, from the standpoint of especially when you have a coach that is influential, leadership, high leadership skills, they can influence self-efficacy. Me saying, I believe you can do this. I believe that you can, give your very best effort. When we reward effort as coaches, as opposed to outcomes, when we reward, hey, you said you were going to do this and you did it. When we reward that effort, that helps improve self-efficacy as well. The last thing is physiological and emotional responses to performance. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working with an athlete who had been working with a coach for a very long time, came to me and was trying to get her head wrapped around improving just functional strength training. She felt like she had been kind of beat up a lot, like it has to be heavy all the time. And that kind of led to the overtraining and the burnout that we talked about. And she was trying to work through some of that. And so when we have negative experiences within training, that leads to lower levels of self-efficacy. And so with her, and I do this with newer athletes also, we're setting both process and performance goals. Because you have to enjoy the process in order to improve self-efficacy, to improve motivation, to improve adherence. The more that we positively connect with the outcomes or with the process, the more improved self-efficacy we'll have. And so what I've found is that if we're constantly fatigued from something, if we're constantly tired from something, if something consistently hurts or it doesn't feel good, it's not a good environment, we have lower levels of self-efficacy as a result, and we lack motivation, and then that decreases our adherence to a program in general.
Wow. So you gave us so many gems here, and there's so much packed into what you just talked about. I mean, I love that idea of mastery as something that you can kind of shift your focus to. You talked about self-efficacy and the things that affect it, the difference between that and self-confidence. I think this is just going to be so incredibly interesting for people. And because you also mentioned that social support, kind of working together, I think one question I have there that people might be interested in knowing the answer to is that, you mentioned the pandemic earlier and how we all kind of like were forced to separate, literally from each other. And a lot of people kind of found that training at home or training, on their own time worked better for them for whatever reason. If you are someone who is more of a, I guess, lone wolf kind of athlete, like how do you build that sense of community, I guess, or have you found ways that you can still kind of create that sense of like you're part of something greater so you can um, develop that, I guess, that motivation, that self-efficacy in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So um, fitness technology is and probably will continue to be in the top 5 fitness trends for the next foreseeable future. So ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, produces a top 20 fitness trends list every year. And I would probably venture to say, I know for the last 5 years for sure, because I have them and I use them in my dissertation research, but probably a little bit before then, mobile technology trackers were at the top of the list. They were like number 1 and 2. They bounce back every year. And now we have your Whoops and your Apple Watches and your Fitbits and your mobile apps and things like that. And I think that one of the interesting things that social support does for us from a technology standpoint allows us to connect with others that are distant. And we saw a huge increase in incentive programs via technology trackers that arose from the pandemic. And I think that they're here to stay. So I know Apple Watch, for instance, allows you to challenge other people. And so you can challenge to who gets the most moves in a week. And, that little competition allows you to have that social support, someone cheering you on, but from a distance. The other thing that I've found is that we lived on Zoom for 2 years, and that did not, that's not going away either. I remember being in my garage training, and we had group training sessions with other weightlifters. All of us signed on Zoom. We were all in our garage all at the same time. And we had the Zoom camera up, and we would do our training and talk to each other in between sets. And that was a huge, there were people on that Zoom call that were on my team from across all of the time zones in the country, training all at the same time. And that created such a connection that I can't explain, that I probably had never gotten before, but allowing that creative technology to allow us to train together while we were forced to be apart, but also because we all lived in different states. And so I think that social support is one of the biggest influences on changing behavior. And we've seen in physical activity, and especially in women, having strong social support networks actually leads to higher levels of adherence and self-efficacy for physical activity.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to see that stuff here to stay. That connection, however we can make it happen, is just so key. Having that support, people who get what you're going through, is just priceless. So thank you so much for going through all of that. This has been incredibly interesting and just such a pleasure to talk with you on all of these elements of training besides just the actual training itself that can really, really lead to such positive outcomes with people. What are you working on now? What do you got kind of cooking, and how can people connect with you?
Absolutely. So I'm a serial do everything all at one time. I can't do just one thing. So right now I'm actually writing a book on optimizing strength, aligning what matters to improve your training and performance. And I think it's really important for folks to understand all of the factors that go into improving training and performance. So many times I've had clients come to me and they just want to work on their nutrition. I just want to cut my body weight and cut carbs and eat very little. And I'm like, but why? Tell me why. And they're like, well, because I want to lift in a lower weight class. And I'm like, but why? Because I want to be strong and I want to win. And I'm like, okay, so do you want to be strong and win, or do you just want to be in a lower weight class? And they're like, well, I guess I want to be strong and win. I'm like, okay, so how about we adjust your nutrition and adjust your training? And so I think that all of these things that align together, we have to stop looking at them as isolated, independent factors. And so I'm writing a book and working on some research that will help us as coaches and professionals better align those things. But then there's also a framework that will help the athlete understand where they are and build to kind of that optimal performance. So I'm writing that diligently, and hopefully that'll be done by the end of the year. While I was writing that, I'm also rebranding my business, Coaching Kilos, which I started 4 years ago, and it was all about fitness coaching and nutrition. So I do online fitness coaching and online nutrition coaching as well. And what I've learned is that most people come to me with goals, but they don't understand that their goals are a part of a bigger why. And so I'm on a mission to help women athletes understand their bigger why and work towards that. So most of the time, it's not just about a nutrition goal. It's about they want to get off of medications. It's not just about a weight loss goal. They want to feel stronger for their kids. It's not just that they want to, improve their fitness. It's about that they want more of a sports specific training program. And so I'm rebranding and introducing Optimized Strength, which I'm so proud of. And it's a reflection of my growth as a fitness professional, as an exercise scientist, and a lot of the research and work that I've been doing. So I'm really excited about that this summer. And otherwise, I'm teaching in the local Orlando area. So I'm rebranding. So for those purposes, you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Newsome PhD. All of my information, my content, my links, and my website will be there. That's the most consistent way to get in touch with me over the next 8 to 10 weeks.
I think that's all incredible. Thank you for, writing your genius down and being willing to share it with the world. I think that's going to be an incredible resource for coaches and people who have a stake in fitness and training. And rebranding is not an easy thing. So kudos on that. But when you have that alignment, and I can see your face just lit up so much when you started talking about that in your bigger purpose. And I just think that that's amazing. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Very excited about it, and very excited to share some of that with you, because this is the first time that I've really communicated it out loud. I've just kind of been working in the background on it.
All right. Well, here we are. It's out. It's going to be out in the world. We will link all of that in the show notes so people can follow you on Instagram. I love what you talk about there. One of your recent posts I was scrolling through and I was like, oh, carbs. Yay. Like we're talking about all of the things. And to your point, right, it's not just these little siloed things. They all work together. And I think you do an amazing job sharing that with the world. So thank you
so much.
Yeah. Thanks for being here on the podcast. So grateful and can't wait to hear how this podcast positively impacts people.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you.